Welcome everyone. This is the 2021 Wisconsin Ag Outlook Forum. I'm Paul Mitchell. We're going to start with our grains panel. First up is John Heinberg. He's the market advisor for Total Farm Marketing by Stuart Peterson. John, welcome to the forum and participating in this online event. Can you also thank you for pre-recording your video. That really was helpful. Can you give us a short explanation of who you are and what you do for Total Farm Marketing as a marketing or market advisor?
Sure. Been with the company 9 years, and basically my goal every day, and we talk with producers one-on-one and just talk about their individual situations in terms of the marketing side of the equation, what they're looking at for cash sales, where they are with bushels, find a way to possibly shift the risk into the marketplace. Obviously, the volatility has come back into the market, so there's a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, it provides a lot of risk, as we've seen here in the last basically couple of weeks. So that's my goal. Again, working with producers on a day-by-day basis and just kind of figuring out what their strategies are and somehow how can we shift the risk off the physical bushels onto paper and still try building a good base underneath their marketing plans.
All right, well, thanks. Thanks for doing that video as well. I hope people have had a chance to look at it or watch it. The one thing I'd like to ask you right away is we've seen the market since you recorded that video just last week. Already we've seen some significant jumps. Is this just an example of the volatility we've been hearing about, or is there something that's really changed? Would you like to change something you made in that video?
This is the volatility that we're kind of really focused on, and we know that's going to stay with us through 2021. Now, we did see a little bit of a change in terms of some of the outside factors. South America picked up some really decent rains there over the weekend. After I kind of put the video together, so that improved some of the crop conditions, maybe stabilized the crop in some areas. So we took some weather premium out of the market, but then I think we're now shifting back to a demand-driven market. As we saw that this morning with a very large export sale of corn to China today. So that's what's given strength back into this market overall, because realistically the fundamentals haven't changed. Even though right now we're again seeing that South American crop may be stabilized. So that volatility is going to stay in front of us, and we're going to continue to trade on the fundamental side. And if we continue to see strong demand news, that'll bring a solid price support here, holding these grain levels in this window. Biggest thing though, we still got to keep an eye on what's happening with the South American harvest and what goes on with the terms of bean sales, bean shipment movements. This might be a window too where maybe beans are a little bit tired. You could get a little bit flat to sideways, just given that global competition coming on board.
So, I mean, I haven't looked this morning yet, but $5 corn, $13+ beans on the board for right now for March. These major drivers really haven't changed in your opinion. Besides that weather in the South American world, what are some of those major drivers we're seeing on this demand side? What demand for what? Or not from whom?
Well, obviously the Chinese and their aggressive grain imports and purchases continue, and that's going to be a big focus of the market going well into 2021, where I see them starting to lock in a fairly good start on the next year's bean crop supplies, as well as, like we said, this old crop corn pile. We're looking at prices at $11.50 a bushel for Chinese corn on the domestic level, maybe $17 for beans, so they can still bring in our corn and beans at these price levels and make it work. So that's going to be a big focus. On the corn side of the equation, we continue to hear daily concerns where the corn supply is globally. We got Ukraine capping their exports 24 million metric tons. Now that's really not a market mover by any stretch, but at least there's a cap there. Russia just put export taxes on. South American crop, that's going to be one we'll really start watching going into the spring. They're not shipping out a lot of beans right now here in January of this newly harvested beans due to the late plant start and now some wetness issues. So that's going to push back that safrinha corn crop, or their second crop corn, which is obviously their most exportable product.
Yeah.
So that could keep some strength in the corn market into the summer. The last thing in terms of the outside influences, where's that U.S. dollar? I touched on that at length in the video. We've been in consolidation mode here for a couple weeks now. Do we break down to those 2013-14 levels? Given the supply picture that could get those prices that boost, we need to get to that range. And then what happens too with the energy markets? Crude oil's been on a nice strong uptrend, and if we start seeing this economy pick up in the second half of the year, it takes a little while to get production online to keep up with that demand. That's going to also be a major influence on the commodity sector in general.
Yeah, so I see those trends make sense. Think about the 2021 crop. Right now, I looked in the board yesterday. Corn is still above $4. Beans in the $11 range for harvest time delivery. Should this should be a year. I think farmers can lock in some positive margins on their grains. I was talking to a farmer yesterday. That's what I said you should be trying to do that this year. What will it take to keep futures at these levels over the next few months so that they can lock in, I'm thinking at least crop insurance in February, that crop insurance price? Can you think about what are some of these key factors to watch for the new crop corn that will keep it at that level we're seeing right now or higher?
Biggest thing is too, how does that export market start building maybe into 2021? Again, I just mentioned that South American weather. What's going to be the start of that Brazilian crop? They're going to be our main competition in the late summer and fall when they bring that crop in terms of the export side of the equation. So that'll be a big key. Right now the fundamentals are tight and going to probably get tighter. At least that's what the market's anticipating. We just got done with that January supply demand report. We saw that big drop on the yield side of the equation. We won't see many major changes on that front again now until September. So it's all going to come down to what the USDA does with the demand. So one of the biggest things we'll have to keep an eye on as we move into the spring and summer months, that's going to be our window where we see the corn export start picking up. Last week's numbers we just got yesterday was our largest for the marketing year for corn shipments. We'll get to that window, the beans from Brazil and South America start taking precedent over the U.S. beans. So our export program there slows down and the corn starts to ramp it up. We've got strong sales on the books for both corn and beans here right now for old crop and adding another 58 million bushels to corn this morning. Can we get that out? We need to see that export pace really kick in. And if that does into the spring, that'll keep prices overall supported. Okay. Lastly, obviously, what's going to happen with the acre battle as we go forward? What's going to be that ratio between corn and beans? Right now we need about 90 million acres of beans just to get our balance sheet back to a somewhat comfortable level given the demand. Is that going to take away from corn? So that's going to be the battle we're going to really watch over the next handful of weeks is what's kind of the tone we're hearing in terms of acreage and how we get started in terms of planting. All
right. Well, thanks, John. Josh, we're going to turn to you next. We'll be back to you in a bit, John. Josh Grunnet, you're a senior grain merchandiser at Landmark Service Cooperative. Can you give us a short introduction of yourself and Landmark, who you are and what you do for Landmark, and what you saw as a senior grain merchandiser over the last year in terms of how disruptive the pandemic was for you and your organization?
Hi, my name is Josh Grunnet, and like you said, the senior grain merchandiser at Landmark Service Co-op. So my core responsibilities is merchandising the grain for the co-op on behalf of the producers and hedging and risk management with grain and grain products. And I also am the director of Landmark Logistics, so oversee the logistics side of our co-op with grain, animal nutrition, energy, and agronomy products. And Landmark Service Co-op, effective March 1, we're merging with Countryside Co-op, so we're going to be co-branded until the summer where we pick a new name and a new brand. And
watch for that.
We're in Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, and we provide agriculture and energy solutions for 50,000 residents of Wisconsin. So as far as the pandemic goes, first and foremost, it was definitely an operations disruption, trying to keep employees and customers safe. We had great buy-in from both customers and employees to change the way we do business and operate around our facilities. We had to react to a lower basis environment adjustment right as the pandemic was coming on to the U.S. and we saw that the driving was going to decrease, so ethanol production halted. We lost one ethanol plant, went offline and still hasn't come back on. So we had to react to a lower basis environment, but since then we've increased grain exports. That's been the name of the game here lately and going forward. So we saw class 1 car loadings go from 5,000 a day to 4,000, and we're back into that high 5,000 area or 500,000 area. So it looks like grain exports are gonna keep us moving going forward.
So logistically, I mean, a lot of what you do is dealing with making sure things ship, or you find markets, place to put them, and making sure that there was disruptions. But like I said, I think it's all happened behind the scenes. There's a lot of hard work by a lot of people like yourself and the people on the staff there, made sure that the grain continued to ship. And like I said, I think you're right. Exports, export, exports. That's what we're hearing about, and I think we'll hear more about that from the other speakers. What are you hearing about from farmers? Part of what you do is, help your co-op members sell their grain. What do you hear from farmers? Are they optimistic, pessimistic? Are they hesitant? This volatility is high. Are they concerned about it? kind of give us a sense of how has the pandemic and the political and global affairs uncertainty, how has it affected their grain marketing mentality? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so the farmer is optimistic, as they normally are in a high price environment. We are talking about political and global affairs, and one of the things we're talking about on a daily basis is just how fast grain markets or markets in general are at absorbing headlines and trying to get a conversation on business and what to do next. And I think the Wisconsin farmers reacted very well to that. We saw a January report about 80 million more bushels of in storage stocks. And I think for the most part, that's a reaction to new sales or new ways of selling. Mid-Miss is closed right now for the winter,
right.
And some export sales are lined up. Here at Landmark, we have a pretty healthy book of sales to execute on, and changing some of the lanes we normally have sold grain to take advantage of exports. And I think the farmer has reacted to that pretty well.
Well, so, and there, like you said, a farmer's always optimistic in high prices. Do you have a sense on John's thoughts when he talked about the battle for acres? Do you have any thoughts there? What you think any of your farmers you've been working with even hinting about what they're going to do for 2021 planting?
Yeah, I think the battle for acres is something we talk a lot about each year. I would say that Wisconsin acres stay pretty consistent. Yeah. I think the key is to try to increase your investment in technology to get a better ROI or production level on those acres, whether it's corn or beans. I think this year, as you pointed out, February crop insurance should be at profitable levels. So I think it's time to try to figure out how to take advantage of that, and putting sales on profitable levels and investing in technology that can help your production to make your farm more profitable next year.
Yeah, I think you're right there about the acreage shifts. They don't happen so much around here in Wisconsin. I think a lot of those are in other parts of the country, particularly down south. They have other options, and that seems where the battle is fought.
To that point, I mean, I think that domestically we're going to wind up with close to the same number of acres at these high-priced environments. Internationally, they'll add acres, corn and bean acres, and so we have to increase production using technology.
Yeah, our best bet is to increase our yields per acre, not try to find more acres. I mean, our wheat acres have been down nationally, climbing. I don't know if they're going to be up this year. I haven't looked at what happened this late fall. But yeah, we just have nowhere to get new acres unless we take them from something else. John, I'm back to you again. Thanks, Josh. Stay online, please. John, I'm just kind of. Do you have any thoughts there about what you're hearing from your farmers? What has this pandemic done to their marketing mentality and this volatility? Are they still optimistic, or do you have any thoughts there? I'm just curious what you're hearing from your growers, the farmers you work with.
Yeah, I'd say the optimism is still extremely high, given we've seen obviously there's some disappointment because of what they did over the summer months.
Yep.
When we had a very unclear picture in terms of bushels, we had a lot of producers that were locking things in early, and then obviously with this late season rally into the end of the year, it really kind of caught people off guard in that regard. So we've done the best we can to kind of focus on what's ahead of us now here in 2021 as well as 22, and it's encouraging to see price levels that you guys were just commenting on that are going to bring some good revenue for the producer. So now the trick is, how do we make sure we balance that out, get a good floor, keep some upside opportunities still in the marketplace, because we got a lot of things to go. It's only January. Yep. We haven't even touched on the summer weather card that could potentially be out there. So there's a lot of optimism in that regard, but at the same time, we got a little wake-up call on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday last week on how fast value can disappear.
Yeah, I think you're right about the weather. I mean, exports are a big deal, but I think the weather is going to be nobody knows the weather, obviously. But I just think of the wet spring. 2019, I think there was 20-some million acres that were prevented plant. That affects markets, and then the derecho really hit and just took a ton of acres down in Iowa, particularly. Well, thanks. Chris, we're going to switch to you. Chris DeLong at the DeLong Company. I'm going to ask you to give us a short introduction. I believe you have a slide presentation, so I think you can go ahead and go about that. Can you explain who you are and what you do for DeLong Company, and what I guess I asked you to focus on the specialty grains.
Yep. Yep, so I'm Chris DeLong from the DeLong Company. I'm the head of merchandising. I also oversee our risk management for our futures and derivatives. I also chair our investment committee here for the company, and I currently serve as the treasurer for the organization as well.
All right, excellent. You got your presentation ready to rock and roll there? I saw it, and
Yes, and Paul, I'm just going to go over like 3 or 4 slides.
Yep.
Since you asked me to talk about specialty grains. I just wanted to define a couple terms just because it
Yes.
is it's confusing. So again, with the DeLong Company, a little bit about us. Over 100 years old. I'm the 5th generation in the business, and we have roughly 10 family members that are actively involved. Our employees, we have 350 to 400, depending on the time of the year. And over the last 15 to 20 years, we've been very fortunate to see some good, sustainable growth in our container export division and in our specialty grains divisions. A little bit about exporting via container. The business model is basically we originate grain from either farmers or commercial grain elevators. We transload the grain, and we have 6 facilities that are strategically located at various inland ports inside the U.S. We then rail the containers to the east or the west coast, place them on a ship, and eventually they arrive overseas. The grain department for the DeLong Company is most of our asset base. It's about 90%. We have 55 million bushels of upright capacity and around 21 country grain elevators. We also do agronomy and seed, wholesale, and transportation. This slide's just going to give a small overview of what specialty grains are. Genetically modified organisms have been gaining in popularity pretty significantly the last 30 years. Because of that, you've actually been able to see production meet global demand. So they have been a positive thing in the environment. However, there is a class of consumers and end users that do desire specialty grains. So they basically go into these different buckets that I have in green here, but the first one I'll touch on is non-genetically modified organisms. So the product does not contain any genetically modified traits. There's no governing body to guarantee non-GMO properties or a lack of non-GMO properties in the U.S., so some third-party labels like the Non-GMO Project have been prevalent. Organic, which is a system of food production which avoids the use of man-made fertilizers and pesticides. Been growing in production in the U.S., and I'm going to touch on that the last slide I give here. Sustainability, the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. Again, it's been a very large fad that's been coming onto the marketplace. The weak point of that right now is there's no strong third-party brand that is marketing sustainability for products. Identity Preserve is a grain or oil seed that we segregate by the variety due to its unique characteristics, which can be color, protein content, taste. And the last one that we do is cleaned or conditioned grains. So grain will naturally have FM in it or maybe mixed with other grains. So we condition it, clean it to take out the impurities in the grain. So again, when Paul asked me to present on specialty grains here, I just wanted to put this in here just to kind of lay a little bit of an overview. But the main reason why we participate in it is it generally adds value to the end user's product and to the producer's bottom line. But again, it can mean a lot of different things. Last slide that I have here, I just want to touch real quick on organic prices versus the Chicago Board of Trade prices. Organic corn prices have been tailing off since 2018, which has mostly been led by the record amount of imports that we had in 2016 and 17. So just to give everybody an idea, the U.S. is a net exporter of all grains. However, since organic demand is so strong, we actually import organic grains from other countries like Turkey, India, China, to name a few. The other big trend that's been going on with organics is the amount of certified acres has been rising dramatically. So in 2014, the number of certified acres was roughly 3.7 million. And today, in 2019, it's roughly 5.8 million. So we've seen a lot of growth in domestic production, which is positive. Organic bean prices, somewhat of a similar story. Record import years in 16 and 17 really hasn't allowed prices to inflate. The last thing that I wanted to point out was, John touched on, commodity prices have been rising here pretty rapidly the last 3 or 4 months given the amount of demand in this country. However, we really haven't seen that in organics yet. The main reason being is they do operate on their own supply and demand dynamics, and there still is a small oversupply in this country, but generally speaking, when you see a rise in futures values, people shift away from growing specialty commodities because the incentive is lessened. And that's all I had there, Paul.
Well, actually, thank you. I appreciate that. I learned some more again. I think we hear a lot about organic, obviously Organic Valley and all the large organic dairy industry in the state, and they need organic feed. The part I really was struck by is how the organic corn it's really converging. It's not a whole lot of price difference between organic corn and conventional corn. It's really getting down there to it looked like about a $2, maybe a little bit more premium. Soybeans has been flat. Yeah. That premium is stronger. How much of that comes out of Wisconsin, the production of that? Is that elsewhere, or is any of that here, or do we feed all of our organic corn and soybeans?
Yeah, great question. So Wisconsin has very, very strong row crop organic production. We don't lead the U.S. in organic certified acres. California and I think Wyoming do, but however, a lot of that is dedicated to fruits and vegetables or non-producing ground. So Wisconsin is a leader in the organic space. A lot of the concentration of acres are on the west side of the state. And in addition, we do have some very strong Amish and Mennonite communities, which generally grow organics.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I bumped into DeLong, and I mean, obviously you guys have a large conventional space, but you really lead in that specialty grain side. It's not something most people are aware of. And I don't know, you haven't said, but my understanding is you guys are an industry leader on the specialty grain world and export especially. How big a player is Wisconsin in that specialty grain export beyond, well, I guess we don't export our soybean or our organic corn, but how big a player is Wisconsin in that specialty grain market, and why is it here? And do we have some sort of a comparative advantage, or why? Why Wisconsin?
Yeah, good question. So the main reason Wisconsin, you'll see such a high concentration of non-GMOs and organics is there's just a lack of strong markets in the states. So when you have that, the benefit of growing these specialty products on the producer level is substantially more. We're kind of smack dab in the middle of the U.S. We're far away from both coasts. We're very far away from the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, yeah. And in addition to that, we don't have a large solvent extracted soybean plant, and the ethanol business in the state isn't very strong. So the main reason why you see Wisconsin be a leader is a lack of alternatives for the producer. And the protein of our beans is slightly higher, but it's not a game changer.
You still haven't said how big a player is Wisconsin. I mean, I'm asking you to brag a little bit. I'm asking you to brag.
Good question. Well, I would love to brag, but I'm a finance guy, and I like to have data to brag about. But that's the problem, Paul. I watched your presentation prior to jumping on here today. You had a bunch of fantastic analytics. In the specialty space, it's really just opinions. The USDA statistics that are out there really aren't that good. Yeah. They're really missing a lot of data. But to be frank with you, Wisconsin is, I would say, is one of the leaders in non-GMO soybean production, and I would say we're the leader in that space in the state. We do a decent amount of non-GMO corn in the state. However, we're too far away from a good export channel to actually get a good premium for the producer. Okay,
thanks. Yeah, Tom Bresner said you guys are the largest container shipper probably in the U.S. For specialty grain, and thanks. You didn't say it, but I'll say it for you. How's that? No, I think it's great that you're here, and it does provide opportunities. Like you said, in some ways we don't have certain opportunities. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to jump back to Josh a little bit and think about, and we've been hearing a lot about exports. And how connected are Wisconsin markets to that global grain market? You talked about it. Tell me, Chris, their company pushes a lot out. And I mean, I know we are connected. What's our comparative advantage as a state and as a nation in that export market? Why are we good there? And frankly, I'm concerned. I've seen Brazil come from not being soybean production really to passing us. We used to be the world's largest soybean producer. We're no longer that. A few years ago, they passed us. So what is our advantages as a state and as a nation on export markets?
Yeah, to touch on a little bit of what Chris talked about, Wisconsin does have access to many different export markets. We're just quite far away from them. For example, Wisconsin corn and soybeans could go to the Center Gulf, or it could go, I mean, even this year we shipped a train to the P&W. So it's a long ways away from the Center Gulf or the P&W. We have access to the Lakes program that go out of the East Coast and towards Europe. And then also, as Chris mentioned, the container market where we have Chicago access to some of that export. But as the United States goes, I mean, one thing we do have for advantage is we have storage, we have space to inventory our grain. We have a great lending system. We don't have to keep our grain around because we're very unsure about what's going to happen to the dollar or currency, maybe as the folks in Argentina are doing. So that allows us to store grain, take advantage of carries or spreads, and then be able to ship grain when the market wants it. For example, we brought some soybeans with us from last year's crop when we talked about a big carryout, and we shipped them in this year's crop because soybean spreads are really good, and now we see inversions in soybean markets. So we've had a big export program, August, Sep, Nov. So that's one of the advantages we have here domestically to meet the needs of the world for grain products.
Storage places here or at the ports, that's something that the South Americans don't quite have as the same level of. And yeah, and I never thought, right, we have the credit system and so that you can afford to wait. You don't have to sell immediately or you worry about things. That's a great point. I never even thought about the credit side. Chris, this is for you. I'm thinking we've seen lots of activity and excitement in these conventional grain markets with this price outlooks and it's going to create some positive margins. But you've already touched on some, but I'm curious, how does that organic price get determined, or the specialty prices? They're somewhat disconnected from the conventional grain market. You've seen that. So what's unique about them? How do we get these prices? It's not just a board of trade. There's no trade. So where do these organic corn, organic soybean, food grade soybeans, where do those prices come from?
Yep, so non-GMO grains are still priced against the Chicago Board of Trade, just at a premium. However, that premium is much more volatile than normal grain basis. So it is a little bit easier on price discovery. However, we can see some significant volatility. When it comes to the organics, there really, I've done the math, there really isn't a strong correlation between GMO commodities and organics. You actually see some long periods of negative correlation between the two commodities. So the price discovery on the organic side is 100% making phone calls. There's nobody that publishes any type of data on what they're paying for organic grains, which is much different. If you go on landmark.com or the DeLongCompany.com, you can see conventional corn, bean, and wheat prices immediately, but you just don't see that on the organic side. So it makes it really makes mental capital worth a lot when you're trading specialty grain.
I remember I was at the Moses conference a few years ago, and one of the farmers took me aside, wanted to know, I'm looking for someone to help me sell my organic grain, and that's well, have you talked to the traditional, someone like a John, and said, well, he had different reasons. And that's when I started thinking about it, how hard it is to market organic grain. We just don't have that same system. I'm assuming if a grower is interested, you guys can help with that, connecting up the dots if they have organic grains or plan on growing organic grains or moving more into that market. And it's just a lot of phone calls. And that's okay.
Yep.
And that's
absolutely. Go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna go ahead. How do they do that? That's my question.
So Yeah, just basically a phone call, but we do make a point to call all certified growers in the states that we operate in. So we do some reach out to them. We do have the infrastructure to support it as well. This whole space is very, we were just commenting on the difference between the U.S. infrastructure and the infrastructure in South America, which gives us such a huge competitive advantage. Well, in the organic space, it's 80 years behind South America right now. There's really not a lot of space dedicated to it. A lot of people don't trade it, and a lot of these producers that are actually growing it don't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. It was always amazed me.
Different.
Yeah, it always amazed me the farmer would spend so much time and money and not really have a market set up for their product yet. That was one of my eye-opening experiences when I first started in extension, is how many farmers grow a crop and have it ready to go based on faith of, well, I'll find someone to buy it. Yeah, so that's what I'm picking up. We are behind on the organic side, and I think maybe it's a barrier. It's just the marketing. I know the USDA, Risk Management Agency, and other AMS, Ag Marketing Service, they've been hearing this and they've been trying to, but it's just such a thin market. And then you get into the food grade. I've seen that stuff. It is always on a premium, trying to capture the differences in management and yield effect differences for growing a food grade soybean as opposed to a conventional. Josh, this is kind of one more for you yet. Thinking about the future, what are some of these new opportunities you think you can see for conventional grains here in the state on the horizon? And what effects do these have on local prices here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so one thing to touch on when we talk about new markets, maybe based on the discussion you were having about space, Wisconsin has about 785 million bushels of storage, or space, we'll call it, for grain products. So we grow about 100 million bushels of soybeans and a little over 500 million bushels of corn. So we have enough space in the state of Wisconsin to hold the crop and maybe add 10, 15 million bushels of SRW or wheat. I think one of the challenges we have is efficiency, space, access to markets. We talked about how Wisconsin does have access to all the major export channels. We're just a little bit far away from the destination, from origin destination pairs. There's a lot of miles. I think there's probably an opportunity to be more efficient at those things, whether it's the right space or the access to market to increase some efficiencies there. But I think what you'll see as far as prices for grain or local basis is maybe something that you saw with the loss of an ethanol plant, is a lot of it does get absorbed. So something new is maybe more along the lines of a public good, and then since we use discount schedules to make all grains the same, we don't see that big windfall of all of a sudden we have a new market and corn's $1 a bushel higher in this town. Logistics has a really good way of spreading that out and absorbing that. And since we have enough space in Wisconsin to take it at harvest, you talked about in South America, when they harvest, they just have to clear the market, sell it when they harvested. We can at least hold it and then distribute it to the right spots where it needs to go. So I think there is opportunities to try to mitigate some of those transportations or handling costs. But a brand new export channel, I think we're there today. We have access to all of them. One of the things to remember, though, for a corn acre, really in my mind, we're just exporting commodity surplus, and we're just exporting acres we don't use. So we can export that in corn, beans, or wheat, or we can feed that grain to an animal and export meat or dairy or excess ethanol. So it's all about Wisconsin trying to be efficient in that export space with its acres in totality.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Especially grains, to pick on Chris a little bit, get a lot more attention. They're excited. There's larger premiums there relative to conventional. They have their own special challenges. But on conventional grains, it's all about a little more efficiency. Okay, we've gained an extra penny for the bushel for the state. Well, that's 500 million bushels that got an extra penny because of improvements in the logistics system here. That adds up. It just doesn't, it's not exciting. It's buried in there. It's like that public good thing where it's a little benefit goes a long ways. And so, but you don't see those big jumps. As soon as somebody has a new plant or something new happens, the grain just moves around and quickly any kind of local premium disappears because we can move grain around. That's a good point. It's a lot more subtle, the improvements. We got one question. This is sort of for for Josh and Chris. As we've seen the export markets really, be a big part of this. How has it been? And the pandemic was, a big issue. You touched on this already, but did we run into any problems getting rail cars, barges, or containers to hit these export markets as we've seen these prices recover? Did COVID make serious logistical problems that we're just unaware of?
Josh, can I take this one?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Rail car service has been horrible this year, and probably for the last 8-9 months. We have some shuttle loaders like Landmark Cooperative does, but we also ship a decent amount of singles, which is less than 100 cars. And we've been waiting on some cars for over 3 months. So the service has been awful. We haven't had any major hitches on our side. I know container rates have been going up here recently, and barge rates are at some of the highest values they've been in probably the last 8-9 years. Every piece of freight that can haul grain right now, given the export demand, is booked up, and it's getting expensive to haul this stuff right now.
So there is a serious issue out there of a shortage, and it's something that behind the scenes, most people outside the industry aren't aware of it.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's been led by. There has been some small hiccups because of COVID. However, transportation is deemed essential for the most part. It's really just given that we have a record export program right now, and we have a huge crop to export. So I mean, COVID impacted a little bit, but not that much, to be honest with you.
It's more of a harvest or just a supply. We've got a lot of grain, and there's a big demand. We're trying to move it. And
yes.
Well, the one thing Josh and I talked beforehand, and infrastructure is a big deal. I mean, that's been the South American problem. They've been investing heavily in new infrastructure so they can participate in these global markets. They're not there yet to where we are. But I just think of the Mississippi River, our railroads. These are not exciting industries that people think of, and yet is our infrastructure falling behind there, or is this something we need to start becoming more aware of, you think, as a state, as a government?
I think that's one thing to kind of put on folks' radar is the importance of the lock and dam system. And I believe a lot of the locks and dams were built for a 50-year useful life, and I think some of them are nearing 80. And so when we talk about exports, I think making sure that we look at that. And to Chris's point, railroads, the singles, from a shuttle train velocity standpoint, there was some good, there was some bad that we've experienced. Railroads changing a little bit of their operating model. Some of the single car movements maybe got less priority than they have. But one thing that we did have that's been beneficial is we had a pretty mild winter, and now that's changed in the last couple of weeks. So we're seeing some slowdown over the last couple of weeks. But I would say we lucked out with this big export program, and the mild winter has helped. I would say that it could have been a lot worse too. So
okay. Well, John, you've been listening quietly. Thank you. I'm just curious if you got any reflections on anything you heard that you wished you added, and then think about it. Giving what you heard, and then just think about Wisconsin farmers. Any advice you'd give them about this year, the 2021 season, what to think about for their grain?
There's a lot of moving pieces, as you just kind of heard in the two previous conversations, and that's going to be a factor going forward. And three of us were chatting a little bit beforehand about the amount of farmer movement and the fact that how much has moved out of the farmer's hands. So that's going to be a big factor in terms of, I think, price as we move forward as well. Nothing moves the market faster than when the farmer gives up ownership. So that's going to be very supportive, I think. Biggest things as we go into 2021 and 22, and I touched on it in my presentation, the volatility is here. That risk is going to stay very aggressive, but it also provides opportunity. And not even this year, but maybe even into next year. The supply picture, barring something that we're not foreseeing coming, will stay tight for the next couple of years at this stage.
even if we put good crops together here in 2021. So producers need to look forward and look at the opportunities that are out there and ask themselves that question: is the risk of doing nothing greater than the cost of putting some opportunities in to move risk around? That's going to be my last piece, I think, to put in front of people for the next basically 12 to 18 months here, is just look at the opportunities that you have and talk with people like myself, your lenders, whoever you work with on the marketing side, and figure out a plan to protect value.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, the conversation I had yesterday was about crop insurance, and and that's, prices are going to be high for crop insurance this year. Crop prices go up 10%, premiums go up 10%, and then this volatility is going to add more. High volatility also increases premiums on the revenue products. And there's just a lot of opportunity here to, I think, to lock in some stuff. And I think you'd hate to see someone lose it, especially to take that floor when we can get it. Chris, you want to add something?
Yeah, it's something to really be cognizant of this year is there is some steep inverses in the market. So if producers are long grain right now, they really need to make a point to sell it somehow before we hit July. I think July Nove is it's at 205 today, and July D's corn is at roughly 70 cents. So that's something that definitely needs to be on the radar, and that can be done with just rolling a basis contract forward, but that's a lot of money.
Well, and I'll be frank there, I don't quite understand what you mean, which means that's the value of someone like John. I'm not a marketing person, and I think, but that's because there's a lot of technical stuff in the marketing, and I think that's the value of a good marketing grain merchant, someone who you can work with to help you take advantage of this opportunity. Because yeah, it'd be great if these prices hold for a couple of years if you're a crop producer. We'll talk to livestock producers soon, and they'll tell us, well, high grain prices are tough for us. About the only other thing, I guess we're almost out of time here. Give you a chance. Any final comments you guys would like to make, or points you wish you'd had to ask? Anything? Otherwise, I've got one more question I can ask. Well, then I'll ask it here. I guess we're going to hear a lot from you heard in the Dean's speech presentation video and stuff. We got a new dairy innovation hub. We got a new meat science lab. What, if you could think, what are some of the benefits you guys get in the grains industry from UW, and what would you like to see the UW campuses do more of? Here's a chance for you guys to tell us what you think.
I just think the education piece, I mean, just with the agriculture producers is really important, so they can understand what some of those headwinds are and some of the tailwinds. I think that's when we're at the table discussing marketing plans, if they can come with that baseline understanding, as opposed to maybe just turning on the TV and watching the news program, maybe look at some of the stuff you're putting out ahead of time to base a marketing plan off of the research you guys do, as opposed to maybe what they get on the television.
Chris, you had something to say too, it looked like.
Overall, obviously, UW-Madison is a great school and a great asset to the state of Wisconsin. The things that it seems like we've been struggling with lately is finding qualified candidates and maybe a little bit more of an aggressive recruitment program or something along those lines, and then potentially getting stakeholders' interest researched at the university. Again, you guys do some really great research, but there might be some good ideas from the private sector as well.
Okay.
Just food for thought.
All right, thank you. I'm just looking at the time. All right, we're going to call that great and done. Thank you, gentlemen. These videos will be available, eventually processed and posted online. Thank you all three for participating, and we're going to take a break now.